FA-18 Hornet, Case 3, Marshall. The carrier's Case 3 Marshall radio call will assign an arriving aircraft a marshalling point that will be described using 6 important numbers. It is assumed that the aircraft is properly tuned and receiving signals from the carrier's TACAN station. The critical numbers are: the final bearing, the carrier's local barometric pressure, a compass radial measured from the carrier, a DME, that is to say, the distance measured from the carrier to the marshalling point, the altitude to maintain, near the marshalling point, and the minute at which the arriving aircraft must commence its approach. It should be noted that the quoted assigned radial is not the quoted final bearing. In DCS, the final bearing is 180 degrees opposite of the final bearing. In reality, quite often, the assigned radial could be offset from directly behind the final bearing of the aircraft carrier, either to starboard or to port, depending on the needs of the air traffic controller. This disparity between the carrier's radial assignment and the carrier's final bearing tends to confuse pilots new to Case 3 operations. This video will attempt to clarify the concept of a Case 3 Marshall approach without using a compass heading at all. All descriptions will be relative to the aircraft carrier and the arriving aircraft. The DME value usually is anywhere from 20 to 30 miles or more, depending on the needs of the air traffic controller. On the FA-18 Hornet's HSI, the course line will be centered on the carrier's TACAN. It will then be angled to a bearing followed by a small arrow indicating the direction of that course line. For the approach radial, this video will show it in red. Pay particular attention to the course line arrow showing that the bearing is away from the carrier, not towards it. This is opposite of the final bearing, which will be towards the carrier. The orbiting pattern, while awaiting the push time, is indicated by the blue line. Because an arriving aircraft could be making an approach from any relative direction to the carrier, the radial, as indicated on the HSI, could appear in different orientations. For simplicity, this video will be using this orientation. An arriving aircraft's relationship to the TACAN's radial is shown here in green with the carrier's TACAN icon shown in black. Depending upon the relative direction between the carrier and the arriving aircraft, the vector that the aircraft must take to arrive at its assigned marshalling point is shown by the green arrows. The actions of the aircraft's DME measures are shown in black. It should be noted that, at times, depending on the relative direction, the DME will count down, up, down and then up, rapidly, or slowly. Remember that the DME is measured from the carrier, which will be in front of the assigned marshalling point. This may require the arriving aircraft to overfly the carrier from ahead or slowly approach it, and the assigned marshalling point from behind or from either side. This is what the green arrows here are describing. You might want to pause this video here and commit this graphic to memory. OK. Keeping the radial relationship in mind, the HSI views are shown in black, with red depicting the radial relationship and the yellow depicting the final bearing views. DCS and real-world carrier operations might differ a bit here. But the difference is important, and it is recommended that, even though the final bearing and DCS's ATC assigned radial will be directly 180 degrees in opposition, it would be a good habit to develop, by flying to the actual radial and then switching to the final bearing. At push time, there would be a change of the course line to the final bearing. If the radial course line was offset, as it usually is, in NATOPS carrier operations, the final bearing line will look in the HSI, as shown. and you will have to fly towards that final bearing as you descend. As pointed out already, in DCS, the final bearing will be 180 degrees from the radial and should be precisely in front of you. It is in this view that the black HSI diagrams demonstrate the confusing concept of the relative relationships between the carrier's TACAN course line settings and what the HSI will indicate. You might want to pause this video here and commit this graphic to memory as well. I hope this helps you to grasp the sometimes confusing procedures for the FA-18 Hornet's Case 3 approach.